This week, we're going to look at how to tape off the stripes on the gas tank. Welcome to Urban Monk TV. So here's my gas tank all sanded and smooth with just the color layer. If I were doing a single color scheme or theme here, then I would go ahead and clear coat at this point. But I want stripes. I want a little pizzazz. So something like this, running down the center of the bike. I free-handed this years ago when I was just testing these paints on a piece of steel. And a couple of lessons I learned from this.
One, this paint holds up really well. Two, I used kind of the cheapest tape I could find. You know, it's a painter's tape, but I just went, total budget at, I believe it was Menards at the time, and got cheap painter's tape. And if you look at the edges of those lines, they're not exactly sharp.
We got to try to do better than that. Here's an example of the cheap tape. First thing that jumps out at me that this is some kind of cheap tape. Doesn't have the 3M brand on it. But that doesn't mean the only option for good tape is 3M. For the striping, I bought something called frog tape. I've never used it before, but they really tout how this can leave you a nice sharp edge when you're doing just the kind of work that I plan to do here.
And what got me was that graphic right there. Without the paint block technology, of course they gotta have a trademark. Nice sharp lines. I'm gonna try this.
And then the other thing I wanted to talk about real quick is just the spacing and the dimensions of this stripe. This is a 1-inch down the middle stripe, and then these are just free-handed. I measured these off, and this gap between these two is actually slightly larger than this gap on this side. So, I don't want to do that. And I have been letting, up to this point, the divine proportion or the golden ratio drive decisions around dimensions and ratio up to this point. So why wouldn't I apply that to my stripe? So currently what I have, in general I like the thick stripe, two thin stripes kind of idea, but what I've got here right now, just freehand this, who cares? Is 1 inch, which is 25.4 millimeters. So 25.4 millimeters divided by the golden ratio, 1.618, gives me 15. Let's call it 15.7. So if this space is our 25.4, then this space should be the 15.7. Then I got to split up the width of, so this total distance here should be the 15.7. Then, how do you split up the 15.7 between the negative space and the positive space? I think that's, something I could freehand again, or I could let the divine proportion drive that decision. If I take 15.7 and divide it by 1.618,
I'm going to get 44 millimeters. So now I've got some numbers to play with. I'm going to pause and just think about this for a second. How can I translate these numbers into something here? Well, one of the things I want to do with this tank is keep this cover that goes over the filler cap. And so if I'm continuing the stripe onto this cover, and I am, I'd like my stripe to fit that. So if I've taken those numbers, I've got a big stripe down the middle that's 1 inch or 25.4 millimeters. And then I've decided that each side of that is going to be a combination of negative space and positive space that add up to 15.7, 25.4 divided by the golden ratio. Then on each side of that I'll have 25.4 in the middle, 15.7, and 15.7. Add that all up is the total width of my stripe package. Stripe package. I'm going to coin that term. That adds up to 56.8 millimeters. So, how wide is this thing? 56.8 millimeters would fit on here wonderfully. So, those are my dimensions. Now I just have to decide, am I going to do the thinnest stripe, 15.7 minus 13.44 is either the thickness or width of my negative space or my positive space. I got to decide which one of those I want to do. Alright guys, sorry, I must have miskeyed something on my calculator, but 13.44 is wrong. So what is correct is 9.7. Gotta kill all that math. So 9.7 is going to be the divine proportion of the 15.7. The 15.7 is correct. So I'm splitting this distance. Here's my center stripe, and then I gotta have, something like this in there with a white stripe in between. And how I break that distance up is going to be 9.7 from the 15.7. We know we have a 1 inch stripe, 25.4, close enough. We know we have a total distance over here of 15.7. Close enough. And then one of those spaces is going to be 4 millimeters. Pretty tight little line. Whoops. Yeah. Well, let's just do the 9.7. We can do that. Which is going to leave a 4 millimeter gap. So this choice would be if I decided to make the stripe the thickest and the space between the narrowest. I hope that makes sense. No idea how perpendicular I am here. So if this is all color, this is all color, that's what the divine proportion says would be a good looking stripe package. Or we could do the other, which would be to continue this. Well, I should do it separately. So color in here and color here.
One of the things I like about this design versus the top one, even though dimensionally they are the same, and even though dimensionally they use the divine ratio, golden ratio, is that to tape this up would be easier. I'll have a, well, 9.7 millimeter thick strip of tape in here and here to preserve this as white space when I spray the dark green down on top. If I do this route, I've got these really, really tiny strips, and since my tape is this thick, I'm going to have to be cutting out long strips of this to exactly these dimensions, and easily enough done, but you know, the thinner they are, the more difficult I'm going to be making it for myself. Starting to like this idea. I also just was holding it over the piece, and I kind of like that. And you might say, well, Urban Monk, that looked fine. Maybe it does. But the golden ratio, hey, Leonardo da Vinci used it, so I think it's okay for me. I don't have a good reason beyond I want to use this ratio and see how it all turns out. You know, why I should use this or not use this. But there's been a long line of successful artists over hundreds and, I don't know, maybe 1,000 years that have been using this ratio, and you find it in nature everywhere. So from the Milky Way galaxy to the petals in a flower to seashells and the spiral in those. This ratio is in there, and I feel like I can't go wrong.
Caught some bad math again. 15.7 minus 9.7 is 6, not 4. So, there you go. There's our dimensions. 25.4, 9.7 in the negative space, and 6 on the outside positive space of the stripe.
So, I need a space to cut my tape. How much space? Well, how long a piece of tape do I need? Here I'm going to need, roughly 15 inches, say 16 just for some slack. I certainly have that up here on this surface, and that's going to be it. That's the length of surface I need, so that's not that long a strip. So for cutting the tape, trimming the tape, however you want to say it, I need a perfectly flat surface. This is a perfectly flat surface that my tape is not going to stick to so tightly that when I tear it up, it, well, tears. And but I also don't want to get my adhesive, I don't want to affect the adhesive negatively. So I need a clean surface. So I'm going to clean this up because it's dirty and dusty. And to clean that up, I'm going to use my ketone, or you could use acetone. Something that's going to dry absolutely completely clean. I went ahead and opened the door for some ventilation. Stuff is nasty. You can see how quickly this dries. In fact, I'm going to show you, and it does pick up dirt.
So just watch how quickly this dries.
So now I've got perfectly clean section here that's more than 15 inches long. I'd say that's almost 2 feet, frankly. I'm going to lay down a piece of this tape. There. Now, I need two pieces that are 9.7 millimeters thick. Get my calipers set. 9.7 times 2, well, it's going to be just under 20. So I can easily fit two of these in here. And I'm going to need a straight edge. And wanted to share something here. First thing I grabbed was a piece of straight bar. And I thought, wow, that'll be a good straight edge. But then I realized that the edge of this thing is slightly rounded. Let me see if I can capture this.
Well, it's difficult to see, but this is ever so slightly rounded the way they extrude this. And if I have a blade, which I'm ultimately going to take a razor, like an X-Acto blade, and cut along this line, because it's rounded, I may have an angle to that, and I may not get a straight line. So, preferred is this. I'm not saying you couldn't get away with it with the piece of straight bar, but this square is not only absolutely flat on the edges, because they've considered the fact that guys are going to use it for stuff like this, but it's thinner, and so that's going to help me get a straighter cut. So taking from this edge right here, 9.7, just going to make one mark, and then one way down here. Using a finer pencil to get a really clean, tight line. So for blade choice, I'd like to use my X-Acto knife because it's got such a nice grip and handle to it, but the blade isn't exactly flat right at the edge, and I'm trying to think about how that'll ride against here. Maybe not bad, but it's also, I've been using this a lot, and I don't have a spare blade here right now for this. I don't have a brand new blade for it, and for this I want to have absolute sharp edge. So I'm going to go ahead with this and one of these type razor blades because I have a brand new one, and it has a broader surface here, and in this tool I can still hold it quite well. So, laying this down, got that tight, measure twice, cut once. That's good. You know, how much precision do we need here? Not quite as much as I'm doing. Stop for a second because I want to make sure I've got a good grip on my bar, because I'm putting pressure against it. Okay, there's one. Let's measure the second one. There. Okay, 2 stripes. And those are all I need for stripes. Because if you think about where the tape is going here, the tape is going to go where we don't want paint. So we don't want paint on the white areas. So I don't have to measure a piece here because I can just use the full strip up to this point, and I'll have, newspaper covering the rest of the tank. Same on this side. So I only need the 2 strips that are the 9.7 dimension for here and here. And I've got my 2. So now the other thing that's going to be kind of tricky is centering the line, but because it's hard to measure a curved surface like this. And there is a seam here that helps down at the bottom where they welded the 2 halves together, and it runs right up the middle, but the paint has really smoothed it out. It was easier to see before, but this is going to be a nice place to measure our middle. So 87 millimeters, 87, 43.5. Make sure I'm in the middle. 43.5, it's there. Okay, so I just used a little bit of Sharpie right on the paint because I know I can wipe that off with ketone. And now I'm just going to use the slightest pencil mark from my center point out, because again we are painting over this area. That is 12.7 and 12.7, which should equal, let me do that down here too. So between those 2 marks should be our 25.4. And that's good, close enough. Yeah. Get my clean strip of tape, pre-measured. This is where it gets a little tricky. So I know I want to be right there. Just tack it right at my mark, but not go overboard. And then I want to bring it down to the other mark, but do it straight. I may just get right over my work here, because as I come down, I'm taping. But I'll get a couple of cracks at this. Now, question is, did I get it down straight? I would say I did. So, I got that where I want it. Now, run my finger down very firmly and get that tape against that paint tight. Because if it's loose, the paint will seep underneath it and you will not have a clean, defined line. There we go. Number 2. This one's a little bit easier because I can follow the line in my other one. Plus I know I'm coming down to this mark I made. That looks pretty straight to me. I get pretty anal about making sure these are stuck down.
because if that paint, again, if it seeps under, then, well, you get what I had on my sample, which is not a great tight line. So now I just need a 6mm positive space on each side. I may just put one more little mark here. I think that's helpful. Oop.
Watch out for little spots like this where paint could get under there. Not that this is entirely visible, but just make sure you seal all the way down in there. Sorry about the bad camera work.
And then one last strip on the other side. And it doesn't matter how thick these outside ones are, because everything here is going to get covered, and everything over here on this side of the this would be a dark green stripe. Another thing I wanted to talk about, well, I don't know if I've mentioned it before, but I am a father to two wonderful daughters who are frankly incredible. They are originals for sure, and super talented. They're driven, they work hard, and they impress me every day. I was listening to an interview with Reese Witherspoon, who is a particularly inspiring human being for a lot of the same reasons I described with my daughters. And she was quoting a Columbia University study on, they did, survey group of men and what they find most attractive in women. And across the board, one thing that they found not so attractive in a woman was ambition, and which really bothered me as a father of daughters. So here, I'm going to move the camera. So I'm thinking about that. We're just coming off of International Women's Day was last Thursday, and which I celebrated because I've got amazing women in my life that have brought a lot of joy to my life and have also helped me be a better person, frankly a better man. And I thought, okay, well, I've got a small audience of mostly men. The YouTube analytics tells me that 4% of you are actually female, and so ladies, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy. But for the most part, I know I'm talking to guys out there according to the analytics, and I think it's a problem that we find ambition to be not an attractive quality in a woman. And where does that problem lie? Not with the women, it lands with us, guys. So that's it. Think about that. Change your mind about that, please, if you happen to be in the mindset. And I had to think about it myself. I thought, what do I find attractive in a woman? I did pick and marry a very strong woman, one of the strongest people I've ever met. And that can be challenging at times. But my God, looking back on 15 years of marriage to a strong, ambitious woman, the best thing I've ever done in my life. And besides having two more of them. So that's it. Just guys, think about that, if you will. Sorry for making this a bit of a platform, but I wanted to touch base on that because we're so close to International Women's Day. And I think women are really good for all of us. Oh, let's talk about women in motorcycling. You want to buy cheap motorcycles, you want to buy cheap parts, you want to have an industry that is thriving and supports your passion, well then we need new riders getting into call it a hobby, call it a sport, call it a lifestyle. I think lifestyle is probably the better word. Where is that growth coming from? Frankly, most of the young guys out there are too chicken to get on a motorcycle. All right, that's not fair. I said it though. Anyways, women, young ladies are getting into motorcycling. They're buying motorcycles. They are supporting this industry, and I think it's fantastic. So there you go. Back to painting or prepping for paint. Oh, last piece. I'm not painting this episode because again, we have rain this weekend and high humidity. I said it the last episode, I'll say it here. Rush your paint job and deviate from the instructions on the back of these cans at your peril. I want a good paint job. I want this to last. I want it to look good. Have patience. We'll get there. Besides, we're making progress. All this has to be done anyways. So the rest of this has all got to be covered up to make sure that we don't get green paint on what we want to be white. And we're just going to use some newspaper. I went out dumpster diving in my own recycling bin to get this. So this is not rocket surgery. I'm just trying to make sure that I cover any area that I don't want green paint on. Cover it up. This is one area that needs a little bit of attention because we don't want, well, here. When this thing is laid down, we want our stripes to continue on kind of clean. So since there's just naturally a little bit of a gap here, we're going to want the stripe to continue underneath this just slightly. So I'm just going to make sure that that makes it inside there some. Nice and tight. Then the rest of this we can just cover up.
So there we're all taped up. But do yourself one last inspection, which I did, and come around and ooh, look at this little spot I missed. I get out with the green paint and miss something like that, which is pretty easy to do when you're looking at this kind of a mess. I'm going to be very angry with myself. So just that final inspection, do it.
So there it is, ladies and gents. This is where the dark green is going to be. Everything that you see white there. Right now, we've got to wait for the rain to stop, and you know that'll probably be, according to the forecast, not this weekend. So probably next episode, weather pending. The other step here is before we lay down the paint, we're going to have to make sure that this is clean. I can see dust here already. And I'll just clean that with the ketone right in those striped areas. That's it. Thanks for watching, you guys. If you like what I'm doing, click the thumbs up, subscribe for updates, and we'll see you next time on Urban Monk TV.